So my big takeaway, I think, coming from the Sunday night game where the 49ers lost to the Bills by 25 points was that, there's so much talk about the Super Bowl hangover. And I think it's I don't want to say it's a lazy talking point because I think there's something to it. But I think in the 49ers case, it's not a Super Bowl hangover. It's a 5-year hangover. Right, going back to 2019, this is essentially year 5 of this core being together, and I think when you combined the mental and physical attrition that this team has gone through, um, you get you can run into these situations where a team vastly underachieves, and I think it's the 49ers are vastly underachieving, and I think as puzzling as it was earlier in the season, I think it's been pretty well encapsulated by the last 2 weeks. When the 49ers don't have all of their top guys playing at a top level, they're a pretty ordinary football team because the 2023, 2022, you can go back to 2021 even, the draft classes just haven't resupplied or restocked the cupboard in a way that this team needs. And even the stars that the 49ers have, I think you could put their best 5 or 6 players up against any other team's best 5 or 6 players. And the 49ers would compare pretty favorably. But I think you can even look at the 49ers captains just as the example to exemplify what's happened with this season. The 49ers captains this year: Trent Williams, Fred Warner, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Brock Purdy, Nick Bosa, Christian McCaffrey, and Kyle Juszczyk. How many of the 49ers captains are having awesome seasons? Trent Williams missed all of camp. I think Trent Williams was playing at his typical Trent Williams level, right? I think he was certainly one of the 3 to 5 best tackles or offensive linemen in the league when he was in there healthy, but he hasn't been healthy the last couple weeks. And that's part of the issue with I think he's 36, with a 36-year-old tackle. It's going to be attrition. Fred Warner looked like a defensive player of the year candidate to start the season. But Fred Warner has been playing on a broken ankle, which is insane. But he simply hasn't been playing at the same level, and it's hard to blame him, right? It's hard to blame Fred Warner for not being one of the best defenders in the entire NFL while he's playing with a fracture in his ankle. I think the only captain among the 49ers captains who is having an outstanding season is George Kittle. All the touchdowns he has, bailing out the 49ers in the red zone, still being an elite blocker and contributor in the running game, still an elite pass catching target. George Kittle, probably the only one of the Niners, 7 captains to be having a Pro Bowl season. It feels like Deebo Samuel's kind of fallen off a cliff. And maybe he's playing through something. There was a bubble screen in the game tonight against the Buffalo Bills where it looked like he had room to run, and a Bills defender got their hand on his ankle or shin, and he just went down. Right? In 2021, Deebo was not getting tackled by a defender's hand. He wasn't falling over that easily. And I know he had the kickoff returns, and I guess he's had 3 really good kickoff returns in the last 2 games. But offensively, Deebo Samuel tonight, 4 catches for 20 yards, zero rushing attempts. And we're seeing a pretty disturbing trend here ever since Brandon Ayuk went out, who isn't even a captain. But obviously Brandon Ayuk and everything that he went through in the offseason, or I guess put himself through in the offseason, and then tearing his ACL is its own issue. But if you go through Deebo Samuel's game logs, 1 catch against the Packers, 21 yards. 4 catches against the Seahawks, 22 yards. 5 catches, 62 yards against Tampa, pretty good. Against Dallas, 4 catches, 71 yards, pretty good. Nothing against Kansas City, pneumonia. And at Seattle, he had 3 catches, 102 yards and a touchdown. He hasn't scored a touchdown since his bout with pneumonia. And maybe we're underrating or undervaluing Debo's bout with pneumonia. Maybe that's a bigger thing. Or maybe there's another injury that we simply don't know about. But Deebo Samuel tonight, 4 catches for 20 yards. I think it's very fair to say that Debo is not having the type of season that the 49ers were hoping he would have. And it might be that Debo is, in fact, aging more like a running back, which was the fear and probably the reason why the contract talks 3 years ago or 2 years ago, whenever it was, were as contentious as they were. Because the 49ers were leery that his playing style wouldn't last in the league. And so we'll find out over these last 5 games if Debo Samuel can get back to the level that made him a Pro Bowl caliber receiver, an all-pro receiver in 2021. Because right now he simply hasn't been nearly as productive, and the 49ers have needed him to be productive. So through the first 4 captains, we can say George Kittle is the only one having a Pro Bowl type season. Brock Purdy. I'll talk about Purdy a little bit more. Obviously the shoulder issue, missing last week's game, problematic. Didn't have a great game tonight. I didn't think he had a bad game tonight. He certainly didn't do a whole lot, throwing for 94 yards on 11 of 18 completions, no touchdowns, no picks. Had the fumble. I think that's 3 or 4 times now where a ball has just slipped out of his hands. And I don't even know if it's just a weather thing, because you remember earlier in the season it happened in Minnesota in a dome. The second game of the year. But I think it's fair to say, obviously, after Brock Purdy was an MVP candidate for most of last year, he's not playing at that same level. Nick Bosa was playing really well at his standard Nick Bosa level. Not quite Defensive Player of the Year Nick Bosa, but certainly serviceable and Pro Bowl type level. Missed the last 2 games, got hurt in the Seattle game. Once he left the Seattle game, the Niners defense had nothing for Geno Smith, and the Seahawks win that game. Christian McCaffrey, who might be done for the year now with the PCL injury. Just a really tough season for him. I don't think it's it's a lack of production. I think it's purely just an injury thing. And this tends to happen with aging running backs. And this is why, as good as Christian McCaffrey was last season, Offensive Player of the Year, 21 touchdowns, 2,000 all-purpose yards. This is the case against the trade, right? Is that running backs tend to age poorly. And we'll see. McCaffrey looked great. McCaffrey looked the best he's looked since coming back from the bilateral Achilles tendonitis or whatever it was that kept him out for so long. Like, he looked really, really good, and it looked like he was going to score a touchdown. And then Taylor Rapp trips him up. He bangs his knee on the ice cold turf. Wasn't padded with all the snow at that point in the game. And now he has a PCL injury. Kyle Shanahan said there's a chance it's a season ender for him. So obviously McCaffrey not having a season up to his incredibly lofty standard. And then the other captain's Kyle Juszczyk, who had a fumble at the 1-yard line tonight. Just had the ball punched out. I think that was also Taylor Rapp. Kyle Juszczyk's a good fullback, maybe a great fullback. Friend of the podcast, obviously, has been on with us a few times, but not a guy who's really gonna impact winning and losing as much as some of these other guys. The point I'm making here by going through the Niners captains, we're really only talking about George Kittle in terms of, hey, this guy is having a Pro Bowl high-level season. That's one of 7 guys. And coming into the year, we knew the 49ers were one of the most top-heavy rosters in the entire league. And they simply aren't getting the A production from enough of their A-level players. And captains aside, you can throw Javon Hargrave in this because he's been hurt, right? And I think Javon Hargrave is probably the guy most likely to be gone in the offseason. You can throw Brandon Ayuk into that mix as well. Obviously, the ACL injury, but it wasn't like Brandon Ayuk was having a stellar start to his season after missing all of camp either. So you talk to any, and I've had these conversations in that locker room when I covered the team. You talk to these guys, they will always tell you your A players need to be A players. And their A players just haven't been. And it's not necessarily a knock. Some of it's part of because of injury. But injury is part of football, and it's why so many people say the best ability is availability, because that's part of being a football player, is making yourself available every game. And again, I'm not knocking these guys for being hurt, but when you try to figure out what's going on in this 49ers season, you have to look at the fact that they've had major availability issues with a lot of their best players. And they had the stat on the NBC broadcast tonight, they've missed 37 games combined from their Pro Bowl players, or guys who went to the Pro Bowl last year. So look, 35-10 in Buffalo. It was not a surprising result, honestly. The people I speak to in text messages, and Kyle's obviously one of them, Nick Wagner's one of them. We didn't exactly have high expectations going into this game, given the Bills may be the best team in the AFC, if not the best team, certainly in that conversation, maybe one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the entire NFL. Going to Buffalo after playing in Green Bay the previous week and beating the Bills, who are coming off a bye and are mostly healthy, was going to be a really, really difficult spot for the Niners, right? Like that was pretty much assumed. Well, that's more or less how it played out. Because of how the 49ers looked against Green Bay last week, because of all the attrition, because Trent Williams and Deebo Samuel were not in there. It was hard to come into Sunday night with any expectations beyond, all right, they're probably going to lose, and they're probably going to lose by multiple scores. And that's what happened. And so I don't want to do the thing where, there's always going to be conversation about, is it time to fire Kyle Shanahan? I'm not there yet, and I'm very far from being there, honestly. I think the Niners could lose out, and I would still think Kyle Shanahan is at least a year away from losing his job. He's just you don't have 4 deep runs in the playoffs and 2 Super Bowl appearances in 5 years and lose it because you have one disappointing season where injuries are definitely a factor, and you just lose your job. Like the worst organizations in the league are always the ones who are constantly turning over their coaching staffs. And we saw like that's where the 49ers were before they hired Kyle Shanahan. So I don't think going back to the coaching well is going to be the answer right now. Now, if they can't reload and they have a bad season next year and fall dramatically short of their expectations, then I think the conversation changes. But I'm not there yet regards to Kyle Shanahan. Nick Sorensen, I think it's a fair conversation to have. I think there are going to be some interesting candidates potentially available this offseason. Jeff Ulbrich, maybe Robert Saleh, maybe some current head coaches, other defensive guys we haven't thought about yet might end up becoming available. Ulbrich, to me, would probably make the most sense. He's somebody that Kyle Shanahan's liked and mentioned previously and tried to get before hiring Nick Sorensen this offseason. But, if you wanted to pin the Niners' defensive struggles on Nick Sorensen, I wouldn't tell you you're wrong, but I would point out that this Niners defense is designed to be dominant up front. And when they have been dominant up front, it's been no coincidence. They've had a bunch of first-round picks and or very talented players playing along the defensive line. The Niners tonight started an undrafted rookie in Nick Bosa's spot. Remember, they signed Nick Bosa to a 5-year, $170 million contract. The $34 million a year was the largest for any non-quarterback in NFL history when he signed it. So starting for Nick Bosa was Sam Aquanu, an undrafted rookie. Starting at right defensive tackle, which has so often been where DeForest Buckner or Eric Armstead has started throughout their time with the 49ers, was Evan Anderson, another undrafted rookie. And somebody who probably realistically third or fourth string on the depth chart had to start tonight because Jordan Elliott was hurt. And Javon Hargrave's hurt. So you have two undrafted rookies comprising half your defensive line. Malik Collins, the 49ers got for a 7th-round pick. I think Malik Collins is a decent enough player. I don't really have anything bad to say about Malik Collins other than he's not a game wrecker, a down-to-down problem creator in the way that DeForest Buckner was, and certainly not as consistent as Eric Armstead was when Armstead was playing his best ball. And then Leonard Floyd, who is, I guess, a decent free agent addition, but somebody, and they flashed the PFF grade. I think he was ranked 80 something of 120 edge players, Leonard Floyd. So a 49ers defense that was designed to be built or was built around its dominant defensive line is starting two undrafted rookies, a guy they traded a 7th-round pick for, and Leonard Floyd. So if you want to pin it all on Nick Sorensen, again, I'm not going to tell you Nick Sorensen is an awesome defensive coordinator, but I'm also going to say, show me the defensive coordinator that goes and beats Josh Allen with two undrafted rookies, a guy you traded in the 7th-round pick for, and Leonard Floyd up front. I just think it's difficult the way the 49ers are constructed. Devondre Campbell had some nice moments. He had a big TFL on a running play in the first half. I remember Fred Warner, again, just the fact he's playing on a broken ankle and still playing at a reasonably high level is commendable. You like what D. Winters shows every once in a while, but it's not, D. Winters doesn't look like necessarily somebody you feel amazing about moving forward, right? I don't watch D. Winters and think, man, Niners have one of their linebacker spots next to Fred Warner locked up for the next 3 or 4 years. Like, sure, maybe he evolves into that, but he's not amazing right now. It was not a great game for Charvarius Ward. Got beaten on the edge for the first touchdown the Bills scored. Didn't contain the edge. I think earlier in the drive it was a holding or an illegal contact penalty on a 3rd down that negated an incompletion, kept their drive alive. They end up scoring a touchdown. I think Renardo Green and Malik Mustafa are probably two of the best development stories the 49ers have on defense this year. I think, I feel pretty good about both those guys being part of the secondary next year. We'll see, like Talanoa Hufanga, who knows if he plays again this year. But he's a free agent in the spring. If you have Malik Mustafa and all the other contractual questions facing the Niners, I don't know that you pay Talanoa Hufanga, but we'll see. He might be cheap. Jair Brown, I think I was more wrong about Jair Brown coming into the season than just about anybody when it comes to projecting young players on the Niners roster. I thought Jair Brown, and I even said it, I think in an August podcast, I thought he would be one of the young guys to be part of the next core, to take that leap, to go from, day 2 draft pick, part-time starter, to like, all right, this guy's a dude and this guy's a Pro Bowler. He's not been that. I think the most egregious play tonight, obviously the long touchdown from Cook. He just shoots the wrong gap, takes out the linebacker with him, and Cook is going the other way for a long touchdown. That 65 yards. That made it 14-3 in the second quarter. And at that point, it was like, all right, this is one of those games where the Niners just aren't going to have it. So, not a great night for Jair Brown. But again, not entirely surprising, right? Like the 49ers are a top-heavy roster, and what makes them top-heavy is not contributing right now. Like Trent Williams, Nick Bosa, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey. I think there's an element now with the 49ers being 5-7. And, they would have to win out to finish 10-7, maybe 10-7 gets them one of the last wild card spots. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's possible, because it feels like it's impossible that they could go 5-0. They haven't won more than 2 games in a row all year. And who knows what other injury is around the corner for these guys, right? Like the idea that they're just going to get Trent Williams, Nick Bosa back, Diamador Lenore back, get everyone back, and everyone is going to be super energized and eager over these last 5 games and show the resiliency to win those 5 games just to get to 10-7 to potentially get a wild card berth. While it's mathematically possible, I don't think it's realistically possible. So maybe there's a silver lining in Christian McCaffrey going down with a knee injury. If it does shut him down for the season, maybe you end up getting a much fresher Christian McCaffrey for next year. And maybe the Christian McCaffrey you get in 2025 looks like the 2023 version, or at least something like it. And you can get Brock Purdy back going and presumably get Brandon Ayuk back healthy coming off the knee injury. That's no guarantee. I went through the defense and just, I thought defensively they're just overmatched. They just didn't have the horses. Offensively, the offensive side, I think, is a little bit more difficult to figure out, right? Because they can move the ball. The 49ers have been able to move the ball all season. They've been, top 5 in EPA per play just about all season. But it's been being one of the worst teams in the NFL in the red zone. It's been the turnovers that have killed them, right? And that's harder to explain other than just saying they haven't been executing. It's a penalty in the red zone that puts them in a bad spot. It's a sack. It's the wrong route run. It's a bad throw. It's a pressure allowed. It's so many tiny little details that can add up over a season that can hurt you in the red zone. And I thought Chris Collinsworth tonight on the broadcast said the perfect thing, right? Kyle Juszczyk's fumble, he says that's the 49ers season right there. The Niners have a good drive. They get a kick return from Deebo. They get down there and they fumble at the 1-yard line. And it's just a kind of a perfect encapsulation. I think the same thing with Christian McCaffrey's injury, right? He has a big run. He's looking awesome. He's looking like the offensive player of the year. There was a point in the first quarter where you go, man, the Niners are banged up, but if the elements neutralize the passing game and it's just comes down to, who can run the ball better, the Niners might have a chance here because of how good Christian McCaffrey looked in those first couple series. And then he nearly breaks a touchdown. And the 49ers have not been a big play offense all year. I don't know what their longest touchdown run is, but it doesn't feel like it's very long, right? And last year, even, week 1 against Pittsburgh, McCaffrey had a 60 or 70-yard touchdown run. You remember Brandon Ayuk blocking downfield, and McCaffrey had a 6-spin move. Like, the 49ers were a big play offense and have been a big play offense pretty much in every other year of Kyle Shanahan's tenure. But they haven't been this year, which has also highlighted the issues that they've had in the red zone, right? There's more pressure on every red zone trip when you're not getting those long touchdowns like the 49ers were used to getting. So it finally looked like Christian McCaffrey's going to break a long touchdown. And he gets tripped up. Not only does he get tripped up and not score a touchdown, but he bangs his knee on the turf and ends up with a PCL injury that could cost him the rest of the season. That's tough, man. That is tough. And feel for Christian. I know, like, everyone talks about he's psychotic when it comes to football. Just that's a tough go. All right, so let's have the Brock Purdy conversation, because, and we'll revisit this when Kyle is back this week. Kyle sent a text, and I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this. And Kyle said it on the pod, so I don't feel like it's uncouth to say this, but he said he's not sure about paying Brock Purdy in this offseason, like giving him a contract, because of, the weather stuff, right? And that goes back to the game in Cleveland last year where it was rainy and he just felt like completely neutralized by the rain. Tonight the weather was cold, didn't look like, he had much zip on his throws. Not that I didn't think Josh Allen, with, arguably the strongest arm in the NFL, didn't look like he had a ton of zip on his throws tonight either in the snow. But I think Kyle's point was, do you really want to pay a quarterback do you want to pay Brock Purdy Josh Allen money when he's so clearly not Josh Allen? I think is what Kyle's point was. And I think it's certainly a fair point. And I thought about it after the game and before coming on here. And I had always been of the mind that you pay Brock Purdy because what other choice do you have? Is going to get, say, Kirk Cousins Springs available? Like, is that gonna elevate this roster? I don't believe that to be true. I don't think going to get a 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers or however old he'd be next year is a solution either. Brock Purdy's still 25. And this is his third season. So yeah, technically, come January 6th, I think, is the first Monday after week 18. Brock Purdy is eligible for a new contract, whether the 49ers make the playoffs or not. He could sign it. Hypothetically, if the 49ers get to the playoffs, he could sign a new contract and then be playing in the playoffs with a brand new deal. But there's also a scenario that the 49ers say, hey, Brock, we love you. We're not going to give you a contract this offseason, and you're going to go into your fourth year without a deal. Now, maybe Brock Purdy holds out, and maybe that gets ugly. But that might be a chance you're willing to take if you can successfully make the case to Brock Purdy that Brock Purdy needs the 49ers worse than the 49ers need Brock Purdy. Because maybe there's a scenario where the 49ers give every single starter's rep to Brandon Allen. They signed Brandon Allen for, I don't know, $5 million or whatever. And say, we have elite playmakers on the outside. Maybe the 49ers use another first-round pick on a receiver, something. We have Christian McCaffrey healthy after not taking as much of a beating this last year because of all the time he missed because of injuries. We have him coming back fresh. We think we can get 70% or 80% of what you gave us with Brandon Allen. And maybe that's your negotiating tactic with Brock Purdy. I think Brock Purdy is probably competitive to the point where he'd say, all right, yeah, you don't want to pay me. I'm still going to go out there and play. And then I will force you to pay me, or somebody else will pay me when I hit unrestricted free agency. And obviously, the 49ers would still have the franchise tag if they wanted to. So maybe this turns into a standoff in a similar way it was with Kirk Cousins in Washington when he was getting the franchise tag every year. But I'm kind of to the point where coming off this season, I don't know that you want to pay Brock Purdy $60 million a year off what he did in 2022 and 2023. Because right now, he's 13 touchdowns and 8 picks. He had 11 interceptions throughout all of last season. His success rate's down, his yards per attempt is down. And look, you could make a case in the first half of the year that Brock Purdy was playing at a higher level than he was in 2023 because of everything he was asked to do and how different the offense was, right? Like Brock Purdy in the first half of the season leading the league in average depth of target, right? Him and Anthony Richardson, top 1 and 2 going back and forth. Like Brock Purdy was making a bunch of difficult throws and not getting the separation from his receivers that he was used to getting the year before, and not getting the yards after the catch from his pass catchers that he was getting the year before, and not having the game's best check down option in Christian McCaffrey like he did the year before, and still putting up pretty good numbers. But with the injury, with the concern that maybe he's not a cold weather quarterback, and if you had to go, say you had to go to Green Bay in January, or, you know, Philadelphia, like insert cold weather city here, maybe you don't feel as good with Brock Purdy as you would with some of the more traditionally strong-armed quarterbacks who are getting 40, 50, $60 million a year. So maybe if you're the Niners, you say, hey, look, we don't have to pay you right now. And Brock Purdy, we think you need us more than we need you. So we're not going to pay you. And if you want to hold out, so be it. We can get 70 to 80% of your production with somebody else, and we can remake our offense to still be top 10 even without you. And I think, honestly, I'd like if they didn't give Brock Purdy a contract, I think Brock would be pissed, and I think he'd have every right to be pissed. But I think he would play without a new contract. Because again, this isn't a first round pick. This isn't like the Niners do have leverage here in that he's not a free agent in the spring. He'll be a free agent in the spring of 26, but not in 25. So I think that's an interesting conversation to have, that they don't necessarily have to pay Brock Purdy. If he is in that Kirk Cousins zone where Washington thought Cousins was all those years ago before he went to Minnesota. And honestly, that didn't work out all that poorly for Cousins either, because he made so much guaranteed money by getting the franchise tag every year. I think it was 3 years in a row he got the franchise tag. Could be wrong on that, but point stands. There is a scenario where the 49ers don't pay Brock Purdy this offseason, and it's not completely crazy, or at least as crazy as it looked before the season started. Or maybe they meet in the middle and Brock Purdy says, I'll take $35 million a year, sign me up, and let's keep the door open to renegotiate and get me a raise if I, play at the 2023 level, or I happen to help us win a Super Bowl. Maybe there's a middle ground between giving Brock Purdy a top of the market contract and not giving him a contract at all. That seems like that also seems plausible. But what is seeming less plausible as time goes on, particularly this season, is the 49ers saying, "Yeah, Brock, blank check. You want the same contract as Josh Allen? You want the same contract as Patrick Mahomes and all these other guys? Okay, here it is." Like that seems like a situation that is less likely to occur. So we'll see. That's interesting. That's one of the interesting things that's going to come. That needs to be figured out. But no, this Niner season feels like it's over. And in terms of like it's time to play the young guys. I mean, the young guys have been playing. If you want to have that conversation, like the only one I really feel like you want to get a much better feel for is Ricky Pearsall, because how you feel about Ricky Pearsall could go a long way towards determining how you feel about the early picks you have in spring's draft. I think there's a very clear possibility that the 49ers draft another receiver, particularly say they trade Deebo Samuel or cut Deebo Samuel, which is realistic possibility. If it's Ricky Pearsall, Juwan Jennings, and Brandon Ayuk coming off an ACL tear and whatever else was wrong with his knee, you feel great about that as a team that wants to get to another Super Bowl with an aging core? Or do you add another first round or second round receiver to that mix? Ricky Pearsall tonight, no catches, 1 target. And we'll see. Like, I'm not saying I don't think Ricky Pearsall's good. I think it would be basically impossible to have a good rookie season in the NFL playing for Kyle Shanahan after missing much or most of training camp because of a shoulder injury. Oh, yeah. And then getting shot in the chest just before the season starts. um, so I'm not necessarily out on Ricky Pearsall right now, but I do have questions that could potentially get answered over these last 5 games. Do you have enough in Ricky Pearsall to feel comfortable with, say you move on from Deebo, Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, and Brandon Ayuk? Like, is that a good enough top 3? And can Jacob Cowing develop to the point where you feel good about him being potentially your 4th guy or whatever it is? But like, to the play the young guys crowd, like the young guys are playing. Renardo Green's playing. Maybe you give Isaac Orendo some more carries, particularly with Christian McCaffrey out. I think that would make some sense. But Dominic Pooney's playing. Malik Mustafa's playing. Pearsall will be playing. Pearsall hasn't had a catch since the Tampa Bay game. No catches on 2 targets against Seattle. No targets in Green Bay. And no catches on 1 target Sunday night in Buffalo. So, yeah, in summation, not firing anybody. If you told me you wanted to move on from Nick Sorensen, I wouldn't say you're wrong. Jeff Ulbrich seems like he'll be available and would be an upgrade. But I think no matter who the coordinator is, I don't think a Niners defense with that defensive line playing Evan Anderson and Sam Aquanu significant snaps is going to get you to where you want to go, no matter who the coordinator is. And the offense has been really disappointing. But it feels like a house of cards anytime you don't have George Kittle or Trent Williams. Like the 49ers were able to have a pretty good offense without Christian McCaffrey because they had Jordan Mason. But it feels like Kittle and Williams, if you're missing one of those guys, those are like the pillars of your offense that hold everything together. And then pair their unavailability throughout the year, with Brandon Ayuk not being productive early in the season and then getting hurt, with Deebo Samuel seemingly falling off a cliff since having pneumonia against the Chiefs, with Ricky Pearsall getting shot and really not giving you anything the last 3 weeks, and with Christian McCaffrey's availability issues. Like, these are, you think about all those things, and it does make sense why the 49ers are sputtering. So, mathematically, they're alive. Realistically, they are not. It is one of those seasons that forces them to recalibrate, and we will talk about it more. Thank you guys for bearing with me as I recorded a solo podcast. Hopefully, Kyle feels better as we get through the week, and we will be back on the feeds on YouTube, with more content coming down the pike. 5-star reviews are wonderful. Wherever you get your podcasts, please subscribe, rate, and review. And check us out on YouTube at Candlestick Chronicles Podcast. You can find us there. Subscribe, give us a thumbs up, throw some comments, start a discussion in the comments. Give us a comment, give us a like. Hit the notification bell if you want to know when our videos go live. Our videos will typically come out before our podcasts. So if you don't want to wait for the following morning for the podcast to drop, a lot of our videos go up that evening, particularly our game reaction podcasts. So subscribe to our YouTube channel. Shout out to Prize Picks. Shout out to Lamb Chops. Shout out to Cooperage Brewing. And Kyle and I will be back to talk to you guys later in the week. See ya.